Welcome, thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us in the launch of IHRP's latest report called Exports and Exploitation, U.S. Prison Labor Hidden in Canadian Supply Chains. So for those of you who don't know, the International Human Rights Program, we call it the IHRP, is the center where we do our international human rights work at the Faculty of Law. Through lawyers, faculty, and law students, we engage in meaningful social change, and we focus our work in the areas of corporate accountability, Indigenous rights, and climate justice. My name is Sandra Wisner, and as director of the IHRP, I'm proud to share that our bold vision, deeply informed by the decolonial movements in the international human rights context and our Canadian context, drives us to challenge entrenched power structures and pursue accountability of the most powerful actors, including our own multinational corporations and governments. And this report is a reflection of that commitment. We tend to think of forced labor as something that happens from afar, in distant countries and poorly regulated factories. But in this research, we've been looking a lot closer to home, specifically at how goods tied to forced and prison labor in the US are ending up in Canadian markets and supply chains. This isn't just a legal issue, it's a policy issue, a trade issue, and a human rights issue. And it intersects with broader concerns around racial inequality, mass incarceration, corporate responsibility, and international legal obligations. It's also an issue that often flies under the radar. Discussions about forced labor tend to focus on global supply chains in the global south, factories in Southeast Asia, on agricultural fields in Latin America, or prison labor in the US. But the use of prison labor in the US, including under deeply coercive and abusive conditions, receives far less attention, especially here in Canada. So our goal today is not just to share the findings of our report, but also to raise questions around enforcement, accountability, and the role that Canadian companies, consumers, and institutions may be playing, often unintentionally, in sustaining these practices. So we believe this report must serve as a wake-up call. We need stronger enforcement, greater transparency in supply chains, better tools for tracing the origin of goods, and a commitment from government, industry, and all of us to uphold the values our laws are meant to protect. This report is the result of months of rigorous research, often difficult research, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge the people who made it possible. Our students are here with us today, along with Nabila Khan, our IHRP research associate and our acting director, helped bring this work to life, not just through legal analysis, but through on-the-ground research, including fieldwork this summer in Alabama. Their commitment, clarity of purpose, and relentless curiosity is the reason that we are here today. The IHRP also wants to thank and extend our deep gratitude to Ronald McKeithen and Terrance Winn, who are here with us today to speak about their lived experiences within the prison system and the realities of participating in incarcerated labor. Thank you for being here and for being a part of this urgent conversation. So before passing the baton to Nabila to moderate our panel today, the IHRP wishes to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful for the opportunity to work on this land. Thank you. Nabila?
Hey, before I get started, I think I just need to make sure you all can see Terrance. One sec. There you go. Hey, thanks for being here, everyone. Super excited about the panel we have here today, and I have the pleasure of introducing them to you. So I'll start with those we have on the screen. So here with us from Alabama is Ronald McKeithen. Ronald is a formerly incarcerated artist, advocate, and writer. He spent 37 years in Alabama's prisons under the Habitual Felony Offender Act, based on a robbery conviction at the age of 20. He used his time in prison to increase his education, become a barber, mentor others, and create meaningful connections with professors, journalists, and volunteers in the prisons. Ronald was freed in December 2020 after being represented by Alabama Appleseed, a nonprofit organization in the South. He lives in Birmingham, where he works as a re-entry coordinator and advocate at Alabama Appleseed. Thanks for being here with us, Ronald.
You're welcome. Now I've been promoted. I'm a director of Second Chance now.
Oh, perfect. So now he's the director of Second Chances, continuing his very important work with Alabama Appleseed. Next, also we have here on the screen is Terrance Winn from Louisiana. Terrance is a widely respected advocate for prison reform. He was incarcerated for 30 years in the Louisiana State Penitentiary, also known as Angola, one of the most infamously brutal prisons in the US that sits on the site of a former slave plantation. Since his release in 2020, Terrance has dedicated his time to advocating for the rights of prisoners, including before the United Nations. Terrance is the executive director of a nonprofit he created in his hometown of Shreveport, Louisiana, that advocates for the wrongfully incarcerated and seeks to help keep youth out of prison by offering alternatives to life on the streets. And thank you for being here with us, Terrance.
Thank you.
And last but not least, in person, we have our former summer fellows, current U of T law students who to Alabama, who did incredibly hard work in researching for this report and helping us write this report. From closest to me, we have Alicia Mohammed, Julia Alvey, Iron McMecken, and Lola Bajoni. And please join me in welcome them. Okay, so I'd like to start by situating our conversation today within the US and the US prison system to get an understanding of what incarcerated work looks like. So I'll start with Terrance and Ronald. Can you tell us a little bit about your time while incarcerated? What did work look like? And perhaps we'll start with Ronald.
Yeah, I've been sitting here trying to think of all the jobs I had in prison, but I've been a barber. I worked in the kitchen. I was a tutor. I once got on the lawnmower crew because I just wanted to do something. I just wanted to do something different. And I really enjoyed it because just being able to feel that machine up under your hand again. But I think my jobs being a tutor, I actually enjoyed that job because of the benefits. I loved helping guys get that GED, which would have helped them get their release. When I had life without parole, I wouldn't expect to ever get out. And also being a barber, you know, barbers are somewhat like therapists in a sense. And it opened the door for me to kind of communicate with a number of guys, because I was a barber in 2 different prisons for a number of years. I used to go in the lockup and safekeeping and mental health and cut hair. So that gave me opportunity to meet a lot of guys and do some, I guess you could say, share testimonies and all of that. But I was the type where I didn't want jobs where I was working with officers, like being a runner, or I've also been a cell cleaner. But anything working with officers, I wouldn't even cut officers' hair, because it's weird to you working with officers having a smile on their face when the day before you just saw them almost beat a guy to death. And so then one of the jobs I didn't want, because I didn't really like being around officers, but I had to deal with them and move around. But I never got paid for anything. You don't get paid in prison. Like, say, if you're working in the kitchen, the only payment you can get if they allow you to take out some sandwiches to sell. And it depends on what position you hold in the kitchen if you're allowed to take out sandwiches. If you're a cook, you might take out 15 or 20 of them to sell for 2 or 3 items. If you're just some guy that sweeps the floor and you're not cool with the officer, you will have to like steal food in the kitchen. Like, let's say, for instance, I was cooking there and I've cooked beef or something. And when you're cleaning the pot off, you have this thing down to catch the extra food so it won't clog. And you would have guys like walk up and try to get that meat just to try to make a sandwich to sell, even though you know it's got detergent and all that on it. And so guys are desperate because they're not paid, but they're working like crazy. For example, if you go in the kitchen and you're getting your food, the people that are serving the food, it is so hot in that kitchen that you can see the sweat dropping off their chin, off their hands and elbows into the food as they're trying to serve it. You had was a serious issue of rats and all of that. I'm gonna tell you this one little thing, horrible, but I was in meditation. I was going to pick up some food for Vipassana that was having this meditation course. And when I went in the kitchen, there's this guy in this big pot. He got this spatula, and you could tell he's not stirring. He's trying to catch something. And I walked around there. He was trying to catch a mouse that was in the rice. And I'm thinking, okay, he finna catch it and throw all of that rice away. But I come back by, the rat gone, and he's stirring it like he's cooking. I'm like, I know he hadn't had time to change it out. He was actually going to serve that rice. And so I called a ruckus and told the steward that if you serve that rice, I'm gonna tell everybody in this prison what I saw and what you did. They didn't serve. But that's the kind of thing that goes on in prison, because most of the people get jobs to get work reports, council reports, but some of them get these jobs that have these perks so they can like make some kind of earnings. And the only people that were getting paid in prison, certain prison has the industry, like Donaldson has an industry. You might start off like, back in the day, you're getting like 25 cents an hour. It may have went up to $1 now or 75 cents, but for a person to get a 25 cent or 10 cent a raise, they was happy to get that. And yes, it was slave labor, but if you ain't got no money coming in, you need something. And that's about one of the legal ways to get paid, and you just being overworked. But that's just the way life is in prison.
Terrance, what about you? What was your experience like?
My experience it's similar to Ronald's. Because the South kind of operates the same throughout all the 17 southern states. They pretty much operate the same. It's slavery, and my experience might differ from here slightly because I didn't have all of the jobs, because I kind of rebelled against the system, because I understood that going into the system, I'm a slave. So to stay in tune with the rebellious slaves, I just didn't go to work. And so the system would classify you as being lazy. But me, I was classified as being a warrior, because I wasn't accepting just doing that work. Because in Angola, it's mostly, you're on a plantation. So everything that you think a plantation is, that's what Angola is. So when you say it's a former slave camp, it's not. It's a current slave camp, because slavery is still allowed under the 13th Amendment. So you got to change your analogy when you're speaking on that, because it's not a former slave camp. It's a current slave camp. If you go to Angola right now, everything that slavery consisted of in the 1700s, it still consists of it right now. And so it's just more modernized. You ain't got to go to our house. You can go to the toilet inside the dormitory, which is a big old warehouse. But you're in the field a lot. And like he said, some jobs you'll get is just so you can get certain perks. The same thing applies in Angola. But most of my time was done doing field work when I decided to go to work. And it's like, I refused to pick cotton, so I didn't really do that. But everything else that consisted of running a plantation, I pretty much did, because I didn't associate it. I kind of like psyched myself out not to associate it with slavery, but it was exactly what our ancestors done. So I had to hold the fields. I had to pick vegetables. I had to, I messed my back up in prison, doing logs, picking up logs, something that I shouldn't have been doing. But the only thing I could associate the work with in prison is slavery, and it may have gotten slightly better, but it's the same principles and it's the same thing that slavery entailed. So I don't have no fond memories of it. It was all kind of crazy, but I could give it a positive. It gives you a very, very nice work ethic once you come into society because you're gonna outwork everybody here. Anybody in society that's like complaining on the job, a person coming from Angola that's making 2 cents an hour, they excel in those jobs because you kind of train to just do it. You train to just do it as to your best of your ability and you succeed at it. And you outwork people. What we'll say is you outshine people because it gives you a work ethic. Because if you got a parole date, you're not trying to get rolled up because you want to go home. So you're gonna work. If you go visit a lot, you're not trying to go to the dungeon because you want to contact, visit your family. So you're gonna do different things. It's different incentives involved that make you work. Some people just don't want to be confined to a one-man cell. So they're gonna work for that reason. Or whatever it is, it gives you a work ethic that's not, can't nobody, it's an incomparable work ethic that you acquire.
I think Terrance, you saying that Angola is not just a former slave plantation, but it currently is. Those are parallels that we hear quite a bit, right? Like the modern prison system being an extension of slavery in the US. And that happens through mechanisms like convict leasing that was in place before, and then modern forms of that as well in current labor practices. Alicia, when you were in Alabama researching and gaining insights on what prison labor looks like, what kind of parallels did you see between slavery and the modern prison system today, and what does it look like now?
Yeah, I think the best testimony and the best witnesses are the people that are here on this panel, Ronald and Terrance, and I'm just telling you what the parallels really are and how striking they are between slavery as we, think about it in textbooks and the current prison system. All I can add is kind of my lens of how slavery evolved and is kind of legalized into this modern prison labor system. So when we were going to Alabama, part of my role was to research the historical background. How did we get from slavery to convict leasing to this modern day prison system? And how it kind of evolved was, slavery was abolished, but as was kind of mentioned by Nabila and the folks on this panel, it evolved into something called convict leasing, which was where in the United States, private prisons had partnerships with other private companies, and these companies would essentially lease convicts. They would go and work in these private companies, and the conditions were eerily like slavery-like conditions. And they were facilitated by something called the Black Codes, which were deeply discriminatory laws aimed at incarcerating Black individuals. So even though slavery was abolished, it kind of kept going. The kind of cheap exploitative labor was facilitated by Black Codes and convict leasing. And then that model kind of evolved into the modern prison labor system in the US, which is so scary and terrifying. And it's one thing to do research on it and kind of see that, oh, convict leasing looks a lot like the prison labor system here that we're witnessing. But to go to Alabama and really see those parallels and hear the lived experiences from people that have been incarcerated, it absolutely blew my mind. And the parallels are very striking. I mean, Terrance is talking about Angola. Yeah, it was an actual slave plantation. And like he's saying, it kind of is a slave plantation now. One thing that's really problematic about incarcerated workers in the entire system is there's a lack of worker protections. So they're not really treated like regular employees. And so because of that, it facilitates the system of coercion and abuse and all of the, deeply troubling power dynamics that you would see in slavery and convict leasing are still present here. And I remember when we went to Alabama, we went to a community support group. And Nabila was talking about, we didn't set out to come to Alabama, but all roads kind of led us here. And someone in the support group said, well, most roads here lead to prison. And I think that just kind of speaks to a system of over-incarceration that funnels cheap exploitative labor that's really central to Alabama's economy. And the last thing I'll say is just that there is an economic aspect to this, from slavery being kind of America's first big business. That was the cotton plantations that moved into convict leasing, and that moved then into the prison labor system as we understand it now. The links are very clearly there, and the parallels are really haunting.
And I think you talking about workers in prisons not having protections, and I'd like to delve into that a little bit more, because there are many reports that describe prison labor as rife with violence and exploitation, including abusive working conditions, intimidation, threats, excessive overtime. Ronald, was that your experience? Can you share some of the risks or dangers that you or perhaps others faced while you were working inside?
Well, there is really no concern for public safety or work ethics when it comes in prison. You just work. And in 2022, if I'm correct, they supposed to passed a law that supposed to had ended involuntary servitude in prison, which it still hasn't, because if you refuse to go to work, you can get a disciplinary. And that disciplinary, as someone mentioned, it would prevent you from making parole, even going going home. And so that's still a form of servitude. And I was in prison during a time where if you refused to go on the farm, you would get what they call a hitching post. You'll be handcuffed to this pole till till that time is over, you're taken back in. But he's correct, though. The prisons are modern day slave plantation. I think in Alabama now you get a change of clothes, a new set of clothes once a year. The whips have been exchanged for batons and handcuffs. I've seen officers put their hand inside the handcuffs and hit you with them like brass knuckles. This thing about working in prison, a lot of guys get certain jobs because they want purpose. They want to do something to keep from going crazy. I went through that phase of battling the system, having to call the ride squads, going off because of this and that. I've had my share of lockup. But you come to realize that it's either two things you can do. You can raise hell up in here, or you can educate yourself and educate others. And so with a group of guys, and now we felt like, okay, let's try to help these young guys. That's why I enjoyed being a tutor. That's why I enjoyed, I was in an honor dorm where I started a beginner's art class, then an advanced art class. We just started, our thing was like education. And even though most of the guys that was involved with this and going to classes and teaching had a life without parole or life sentences, but that was the only way that we can try to battle the injustice that we saw. Alabama, since 2000, has earned $250 million from work release, or just inmates working. And that's a lot of money. And also in work release, they're going to get 25% off the top. And plus, if you're at work release, you work in work release, work therefore is doing laundry, you'll pay them $2 an hour. These are still slave wages. And then also when you mentioned about leasing, they are leasing inmates to places like McDonald's, Burger King, where they would get minimum wage. And because they're leasing them, because they're prisoners or from a work release, they can't argue about their wages. They can't do that. And then also by you having a bunch of people there that's getting minimum wage and can't argue about getting more, that puts the other people working out wages in jeopardy. I once even, it's this restaurant that I did a birthday party at. I got in conversation with a person there, and they was telling me how different they treated the women from, let's say, this love ladies, these women work release, how different they treated the women from the other people actually working there. They even fed them different. It's like they treated them like they were like, from prison. But as far as the safety and all of that, like I said, I didn't take the certain jobs that had me having to put myself in danger and stuff, especially when I got to the point to where, like, I became a barber because I went to school and I got a barber certificate. I also went and got a commercial food certificate. And that kind of like, you want to further your career. You want to keep on practicing your trade. And so, but I realized that trying to fight the system, because I done seen too many guys get beat down by officers. I done seen too much of it. And in these Alabama prisons, you don't have a win. You really don't have no win. And he can say the same thing for Angola. When it comes to how they, like I said, they traded the whip for the stick. And I'm a barber. I done seen too many guys cutting their hair with these notches all on their head, and I'm hearing their stories, especially we are not gonna talk about the knife wounds around the neck. But as for them being concerned about your safety, another thing, it was a tutor that I worked with. He was there tutoring for I don't know how many years. It's an old guy. They weren't taking care of his health. He died in the kitchen. I can think of other people that have worked there that have worked for years. And once they got sick, we have a client now that he worked in the kitchen for I know at least over 2 decades. And then they didn't give him proper medical care. And so he ended up in the hospital for the last 2 years he was there. If we hadn't gotten him out, he would have died. But they don't give you the proper medical care. If you have hep C or have HIV, you can come out of prison not even knowing it. You won't find out till you get out here. And they will not even tell you about your ailments, particularly if they got to pay a certain amount of money to get you the proper treatment you need. So, yeah, they're not concerned about your health, about your safety in prison. They will work you till they can't work you no more. And then when you don't want to work, they'll write you up, give you a disciplinary. And then you have to go to the lockup or something. That'll keep you from getting your visits, as he explained. So they have ways of making you want to work, But then you have a lot of, right now, prisons are mental health institutions and nursing homes. That's practically what's in prison now. It's a nursing home and a mental health institution. And it's crazy and it's really bad down here. I don't know if it's bad as Angola, because I done heard some things about Angola, but it's bad as well in prison, especially when we're talking about the drug use and how officers are bringing so many drugs in there. And it's just a horrible scene right now. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And I think what it's telling us is also how coercion can take many forms within prisons, right? Like you have the outright coercion of, threats of violence, threats of being in solitary confinement, but then also these disciplinaries. When we were in Alabama, we went to a parole hearing, and we saw how difficult it is to get parole and how work can be directly tied to parole, right? If you refuse to work, that can be a disciplinary and that can affect your ability to get parole. And one of the most astonishing things we heard is that because parole rates are so low in Alabama, you're more likely to leave a prison in Alabama in a body bag as opposed to freed and getting parole. And sorry, yes, Ronald.
Concerning parole, for the last 2, 3, I don't know, hopefully not 4, for the last few years, they've been setting everybody off 5 years, the max, which was really unheard of because it used to be 6 months, a year, 2 years. And for instance, it's a friend of mine, Jimmy Click, had been locked up. He's been there maybe 37 years now, but he had served 32 years, not one disciplinary, worked in the chapel, maybe 90% of his time in prison, still works in the chapel. And he wanted for parole. They set him off 5 years. Why? Now, I've been to the parole board to talk up for 3 different individuals, and all 3 individuals met the guidelines. But you'll have the opposite side to get up there and just start saying anything just to make it look negative and disregard the fact that this guy hasn't had a disciplinary, hasn't done this, has met this and this, but they still would set him off 5 years. At one time, everybody was getting sent off for maybe 2% wasn't. And that's one of the issues we've been dealing with. And now imagine this, you're in prison and you're doing everything you possibly can to get these good, to not get a disciplinary, to get good work reports, counsel reports, and all of this, trying to make it be a model inmate in prison. And then you go to parole board and they set you off 5 years. Just think what they can do to your psychic. And now it's like, ain't nothing I can do you know, and then you have guys that have been set off 5 years twice. But it's nothing you can do. And you there, next thing you know, you having to get on drugs and drink and all that just to try to keep your mind intact because you're trying to get on your family. You done put up with dudes probably slapping you, pulling knives on you, you know, just to try to keep from getting a bad record. And then to get set off 5 years, it's crazy. And then right now you have and think about, and you was right about the health. You have so many guys in prison that are in wheelchairs that have gotten their foot, toes, leg cut off, becoming diabetic because they're not getting fed properly. You've got guys that could have had one simple procedure done to that back, but it's this, what is this? I can't think of the name of it, that a lot of guys are getting, coming out barely able to walk. It's just a lot of things going on that really it's not going to get addressed. It's too much going on to get addressed because Alabama will pay millions of dollars to keep you from addressing that. And right now, this is the second DOJ lawsuit they put on them. And they're spending more money to try to keep the seller list or to try to keep it on the low than it is to try to fix it. And right now we're in the process of building a big old new prison. And they feel that that's going to be the answer, that having this new prison is going to be the answer. But if you get a dysfunctional family that's living in this house, they can be regular or whatever, that's doing all kind of crazy stuff from molestation, drugs, abuse, everything. And you think if you get that family and put them in a nice, sweet looking mansion, that's going to change the issues? No. And you're also going to put the same crooked, sadistic cops in that prison too. That's not going to change. You're going to also put the same cops in there that's bringing all the fentanyl and the drugs in the prison. You're going to put them in the new prison. That's not going to solve it. These things are infrastructure. This thing's going on in this prison that it's going to take people outside of Alabama coming in here and dealing with it. Because the people that's here in Alabama, you don't have enough people in Alabama that has a strong enough voice to make the change that needs to be changed. Because it's a film finna come out called The Alabama Solution. We had to do the first screening in another state, because we felt if they had found out in Alabama, that's going to put up and try to block it. It's going to, I think in October, I think it's going to come out on HBO. But it's showing where people in prison, they have used their phones and took pictures. And they're showing you what's going on inside of prison. And this is going to, when this film comes out, it's going to make a lot of people mad. Because this is things they don't want you to know. If you was to come here now and they're going to give you a tour of the prison, they're going to take you to the sweet spots. Not the crazy spots. They might take you to the Underdome where if somebody speak out of turn and tell you what's really going on, they're going to get put out the Underdome. But if they take you to another block, a regular block, they're going to tell you everything and cuss you out too. But it's a lot going on. But with that, yeah, work release and parole boards, they're not really working. But hopefully, they've placed me on this task force, this reentry task force. And I'm working with a group of people that have been in the system for a minute working, but I'm hoping that we can solve some of these issues, not just with reentry, but things that's going to need to be done before you leave prison. Because they supposed to be giving you IDs, birth certificates, Social Security card, even having you set up for insurance, not insurance, but dealing with healthcare. But they don't do it. And so when a person leaves prison, they go through pure hell trying to get it. And that's one of my jobs, what I do here, is get these things for these guys. But it's a lot of changes we're trying to make, but it's one thing that's for sure, that prisons in Alabama and other states are modern day plantation, and it needs to be addressed and it needs to be changed because people are using their lives. They're dying left and right. Body bags going out the back gate. They don't care about the fentanyl coming in. Now when it's so many people that are on drugs, when they count, they just step over the individual. You have homeless people in prison in Alabama that if a person's on drugs, on fentanyl, on crack, you will not live in the cell with me. You can know we're not going to have that. You're going to live somewhere else. And so many guys get put out that cell because if you're in this cell with a guy and you're regular stealing that stuff and all of that, no, you're going to get hurt, killed, or something. So they just kick them out. And so now you got homeless people on drugs living out like in the streets in prison, where when they do they count, they just count them on the ground and step over them.
I'm just going to let Terrance come in here to give us some insights into his experience in Louisiana.
I forgot what the question was.
Just in terms of we talked a little bit about coercion in the prison system and you know, the types of violence that exists within the prison system that forces workers to work. Is this something that you experienced as well?
Oh, yes. You know, at one time, if you didn't go in the field in Angola, you could look to get beat. They had a crew called they call it the goon squad. So if you didn't go to work, they was gonna beat you. And it was like, just say if you was to go in the field and you just ran into an issue in the field and you wasn't gonna go in, you had to stop working. And they was coming, put those handcuffs behind your back, and there would be like two of them, big old white guys. They was gonna just throw you on the back of the truck, bust all your face open and stuff. All of them was gonna just jump on you. So they kind of, that physical brutality kind of forced people to just go to work because people didn't want to get beat, or you can just get sick and while you working in the field. And they had man, they had one of the most, you know, excuse me for saying the truth, but the truth is the truth. They had one of the most racist white guys. He was an EMT, which is you know, everybody know what EMT is. And he had to come see about you in the field. And he was given this position because he was so racist, he had no compassion for a black person. So you could be, I done saw where a guy was throwing up blood, and because he had dehydrated so badly, and he couldn't move no more. So this man came out because the guy fell down, and he fell ironically close to a ant bed with the big fire ants. And this man came and put those ants on that guy. Man, the dude swole up so bad, the dude had a heart attack behind that. So it was in Angola, and I can probably say it's probably like this in every southern prison. Black and white is a real big issue within that prison system. So black people are gonna get treated like black people were treated before laws started to kind of like giving us a little leverage to be treated and to be accepted as humans. So when you go in, a white guy's gonna get preferential treatment as opposed to a black guy. A black guy could come in with a Harvard degree, and he's still gonna be given a dog treatment as opposed to a high school dropout white guy coming in at the same time. He's gonna get a better job off the top. The black guy gonna go in the field, which we actually had a Harvard graduate in Angola with me. But it's a harsh thing there because at that time it was like it operated off of brutality. Man, they had a crew used to come on at nighttime, and that's all they came to do was bust a black person head. You know, some black guys didn't even survive; they died. If you just said something out loud, man, it was horrible. And you know, you bring that back into society, but it was a fear cycle that went along with things, and people was just actually fearful. Man, you could be hurting and you just have to go to work because you didn't want to get beat, you didn't want to get written up. So it was so many factors that played into you just going to work against your will. Because you ain't getting paid nothing, 2 cents an hour. You know, what's 2 cents an hour? Stayed in prison for 30 years. And I came home, I ain't have $1. So what's the retirement? There's no retirement in prison, practically. You're gonna work practically until you die. But a lot of people work because they scared, because they don't want certain things to happen to them, certain threats to be issued, and guys just give in. You know, it's like it's a movie about to come out. Just looking at what Ronald was saying, I forgot it, but it shows you how could the few control so many, because it's like a few people controlling 5,000-6,000 men. But that fear is real. And it's so, you know, when you look at slavery, you look at how could this many people not think to overthrow their masters. And it's the same psychology applies in prison. The psychology hasn't changed, period. You got 300 or 400, like sometimes it'd be 200 men in the field. So only 3 people over you, or 4 people over you. But you in line. You're gonna work. You ain't finna like get out of line. So you can understand how those cycles continue to be in operation today. So, you know, the biggest thing I could just say about it is it's a great psychological game that they play on people to keep people confined.
I think both you and Ronald, you know, raised the immense coercion and violence that exists in prisons in the South. And I think Ronald also mentioned that there is a current ongoing lawsuit from the DOJ, historic in many senses because of, you know, just how violent the Alabama prison system is. The DOJ has been stepping in because they're finding that, or alleging that these prison systems and the prison conditions are unconstitutional. And in Louisiana, we have a very similar lawsuit by workers who are claiming that the farm line is also unconstitutional because of the harsh conditions that people work in. We talked a little bit about prison conditions, and I think we can go on for a really long time because there's so much to say. I'd like to turn to Canada because we are here situated in Canada. And, you know, one of the things we looked at in our report is how Canadian companies and by extension, Canadian consumers could potentially be contributing to these exploitative practices. So I'd like to turn over to IRN. In our report, we discussed how there might be some linkages between Canadian companies and US prison labor. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what was most surprising to you?
Yeah, so the Canadian economy we found has many linkages with US prison labor, particularly in the automotive and food industries. It can be really difficult to trace exactly where prison-made goods enter the Canadian supply chain because items produced using prison labor are often purchased and incorporated into a different product several times before an end product for consumption is eventually produced. But that said, over the course of our research, we were able to trace potential links between auto parts manufacturers and Canadian importers, given the uniquely integrated auto industry with Canada and the US. For example, certain cars imported into Canada are exclusively produced at a particular plant in the US. And if that plant sources products using prison labor, it's very likely that those car models sold in Canada use prison labor in their supply chain. We also found that many auto parts manufacturers are concentrated in the southern US. In 2023, the top exporting state of auto parts was Alabama, and in the southern US, many companies were found to have employed incarcerated labor. This is one of the reasons that we ended up in Alabama to do our research. The food industry is also a sector in which we found many potential linkages to prison labor because the US and Canada have a prominent agricultural trading relationship with billions worth of goods entering Canada from the US every year. The food industry is also difficult to trace due to the structure of the modern food supply chain. Raw products produced using prison labor can be intermingled with products from other sources, being processed and further transformed before becoming a product for consumers. So corn is a great example. Corn might be picked by prison workers and then transformed into corn syrup, which is then used to produce beverages and candy, which makes it very hard to trace the origins. Still, we were able to identify possible sources of food produced using prison labor at restaurants and grocery stores in Canada. In addition to these two industries, we found potential links to prison labor through products like home furnishing, pet products, children's toys, and lumber, just to name a few. I think something that I found most surprising about our research is that given the trade relationship between Canada and the US, it's very likely that products we use every day were made using prison labor. The cars we drive and the food we eat, the home goods we use might have used prison labor at some point in their production, and it's really hard for consumers to get this information.
Yeah, and I think what's also interesting when we were doing our report is finding these linkages and then also knowing that Canada has certain laws and on the books that actually prohibit the importation of goods made using forced labor or prison labor. So Julia, I know you did some research on these laws and the bans. Can you tell us a little bit about them and what this means for companies who might be violating these laws?
Yes, so there are two main bans in Canadian law that we researched as part of this report. Canada has a ban on importing goods that are made using forced labor, and we also have a ban on imports of goods that are made using prison labor. So the forced labor ban makes it illegal to import any goods that are mined, manufactured, or produced wholly or in part by forced labor. And to determine what forced labor is, the law relies on the definition under international law or under the Canadian Supply Chain Act, which says that it's labor that a person provides under circumstances where they would believe that their safety will be threatened if they don't provide the labor. And Canada also has its ban on the import of goods made using prison labor, which applies to goods imported for sale or for business use. So we found that this second ban actually came about in Canada from concerns in the late 19th century about convict leasing actually in the US, and was described at the time by Canadian MPs as a virtual system of legalized slavery. And despite these bans, interestingly, there hasn't been much evidence of the Canada Border Services Agency enforcing them. And it's actually stopped very few shipments so far. But nonetheless, there are serious criminal sanctions in Canada for those who violate the bans directly, and even those who are connected in other ways. So under our Customs Act, it's a criminal offense to import goods that are banned or even to possess, buy, or sell illegally imported goods. So this potentially encompasses not just importers, but also distributors, wholesalers, retailers, and even consumers. And even beyond that, those who deal with the proceeds or the sale of illegally imported goods, like financial institutions that provide financial services to importers, could be criminally liable. And this is because of the money laundering offense in Canada, which prohibits dealing with the property obtained as a result of a crime, like a violation of the forced or prison labor bans in Canada. So altogether, all of that said, there are lots of actors in Canada who could potentially be criminally liable in connection with importing something made using forced or prison labor, including the actual importer, actors further downstream in the supply chain, like distributors, wholesalers, retailers, even consumers, and anyone who deals with the proceeds of the sale of the object, like a financial institution that's providing financial services to the importer.
Thank you. So, there are definitely problems in Canada because although we have these laws on our books, it's like they're not necessarily being enforced in Canada. So we might be unwittingly buying goods that are made using prison labor in the US. But I want to talk about what we do next. Like, what are the next steps? How do we look ahead? And Terrance and Ronald, I mean, you've taken your experience in this incredibly unjust system and turned it into advocacy. What do you think is most urgent to change in the prison system and the prison labor system? And maybe we'll start with you, Terrance.
I think payment is needs to be changed in Louisiana. Because you got a lot of fathers in prison. And we want to take, we want a father to be a part of the family structure, and we want kids to be taken care of. and taxpayers will say, we tired of paying, taking care of somebody else's kids. Well, if you allow the guys that's been taking out of their kids' lives because of prison, you let them work. And instead of just giving them the money, you send the money to their kids. That way, they don't have to come home on child support with a big debt over their heads already. So if they can continue to pay, and if they're there for however many years, up until that kid gets 18, allow that parent to take care of his kid through them working. It's showing a great ethic. Oh, it's showing a great work ethic. It's also showing responsibility. It's showing accountability, and it's showing, and besides just taking care of his kid, he can also, if he got victims, he can also pay his retribution back to him working. Instead of just giving him 2 cents an hour, just give him minimum wage. And you do not have to put the money into their account, but they can see that their money is being taken and used to to help their families. And like I said, if it's a victimization, you can also send money to that. So I think that's the biggest thing that needs to be addressed immediately.
And Ronald, what do you think is the most urgent thing to address right now? And you're muted, Ronald.
When it comes to the work labor force, I agree with everything he said. And really, that's a great idea for us, child support, give them a position of getting paid to do that. At one time, there was talk about paying kitchen workers. And I don't know what happened to that. If I'm correct, I think it was some officers or whatever convinced some inmates to kind of like go against it or something, but nothing ever came about it. And in Alabama don't believe in paying their slaves. They don't believe in that. But I think that's one of the most important things that with the labor force, also education. Like here, you got guys working in industry. I've never worked in the industry. I don't know what they're doing there, but I know they make a lot of parts and a lot of stuff, maybe chemicals and stuff that Alabama uses. But we also had a college where we had wood furnishing, where guys were signing up for college doing that. But a lot of that labor, they was kind of getting paid when officers would bring certain furnitures and all that for them to refurnish it and all that. And I'll probably give them a couple pack of cigarettes when they had to pay maybe $200, $300, $400, $500 out here. It's the same with barbers up in there, not getting paid. Officers, like when I would go to the lockup, I'm going to different, at least once a month, we're going to cut cut hair the whole prison. Everywhere cutting hair. It'd have been great if we could have gotten paid, but they don't believe, they just want to work you. Even on the lawnmower crew, when I got on that, because like I said, I just wanted to do something. You're cutting the grass all the way around the prison. No, they're not even thinking about paying you. The way that what officers do, they pay you by giving you cookies and candy, or drink, or giving you a leftover meal, or may bring you some church's chicken. But that's scraps that you throw slaves. When they know that at a barber shop, you may have to pay $25 for a haircut, but you can get away in here by giving a guy a couple of dollars of some sweets or something. And it's the same in the industry. When they was doing refurnishing, they give them some, cigarettes, something, a little something. But that's how prison is. That's just how prison is. But that's the biggest thing. Pay these guys, because if you pay them, they got purpose, they can help their family, and then they'll be able to do a better job. If you pay the person that's cooking in the kitchen, he's less likely to get mad at a sergeant and spit in your food or something. He's less likely to keep cooking that food if you found a rat in it. They would take pride in their work. But getting Alabama to do it, I would love to see it. I would love to see it.
And Lola, finally, I'll turn to you. You're a law student in Canada, and you've spent so much time, looking into these exploitative conditions that exist in the US and how Canada may be linked to it. What do you think Canadians should be doing what role can they play to end the forced nature of prison labor?
So yeah, there are a few things that I think Canadians, Canada, as in the government, and also Canadian companies can do. And especially in the context right now of the US-Canada trade relations, there really is
no better time to be talking about this issue. So the first thing is calling for the enforcement of the CBSA import ban that Julia was talking about earlier. Currently we have it in place, but there haven't been any statistics reported to date about investigations that CBSA is taking, any apprehensions they've made of goods, or any goods that they've blocked from coming into Canada. So in our recommendations in the report, not only having enforcement of this ban, but also having a way to raise public awareness about it, having people know about this ban, and also having a mechanism for them to report it so that researchers like us or journalists or anyone in the future can also raise the risk of goods made using forced or prison labor coming into Canada. And then the second thing would be enacting legislation about human rights due diligence. Under the Supply Chains Act, Canadian companies currently have to report about risks in their supply chains and anything that they're doing to prevent these risks of goods made using forced or prison labor in their supply chains. But the reporting kind of stops there. So in a lot of other countries like France or Germany, for example, they have human rights due diligence laws that not only require them to identify these risks, but also to address them and remedy them if like they are actually existing. So a way that that could be addressed in Canada would be enacting legislation that not only requires companies to identify these risks and say that they're preventing them, but also if there is a legitimate risk that they're using forced or prison labor, that they have to remedy that situation.
Okay, thank you. So we have a little bit of time for audience questions. And we can take some questions from folks in person and then maybe someone online as well. So yeah, anyone have anything that they'd like to ask? Yes.
Sorry, I do have a question on how this does interact with the reporting laws that come into line with modern slavery and child labor and supply chains act. Because a lot of these companies are now putting these out there. Like I know all the financial, like the big five banks have this. A lot of the larger companies have these statements out there. And, you know, a lot of them are very high level. And I know a lot of them are essentially what they did for Australia or what they did for the UK, and that they changed a few words here or there to make it compliant for Canada. But is there anything that we can do to kind of pressure them to make it more substantive? Because I think a lot of these places now are kind of treating it as a simple compliance exercise, and in some places it's almost like a marketing guide sometimes, and a little bit of human rights washing is going on there. Is there anything that we can maybe push as an industry best practice to make it more substantive than what we're currently seeing?
Well, you kind of like hit the nail on the head for what we're saying in our recommendations, but you're right that under the Supply Chains Act, there is just that requirement that I think it's like a 2-pager gets published and says, these are the risks, this is what we're doing to prevent them, but there's not really much substantive material about what risk pertains to that specific company and how they're addressing it. So one of our calls in our recommendations is just more stringent human rights due diligence legislation to ensure that they're not only having to identify this in their 2-pager public document, but they're also taking action if there is that risk that they can identify, or if a member of the public can bring a risk to their attention and having a mechanism to report that.
Yeah, and I think these laws kind of go hand in hand, right? Because you'll find companies that don't even identify risk. They'll just say, you know, this is our human rights policy. We don't tolerate any form of prison labor or forced labor. But it doesn't go beyond that, right? So, but we do have, you know, as Julia mentioned, we have these laws in place that are meant to prevent goods being made using prison or forced labor from entering. And when you use both and put them together, you might have a company saying, we don't think we have a problem, but then you have these imports showing that they do. So how do we combine the two and try to get them to take some sort of action? Yeah, Julia.
I would just add as well that for a little bit of background, this law that we're talking about, the Supply Chains Act, was introduced in, I think, January 2024. So it hasn't been enforced for very long, and there's only been one reporting cycle. But so far, public safety has not made any orders requiring a specific entity to comply with the act or laid any charges against an entity under it. So there is, I think, also an opportunity to look at what other countries in the world are doing with respect to due diligence. One of those companies is France. It was one of the first to kind of take action in this area, and it requires companies to publish annual vigilance plans. And in the EU, I think they're planning on creating a database by 2026 with information on forced labor risks and products. So maybe that's something that we can look ahead to for the future as well in Canada.
Anyone else back there? Yeah.
Yeah, I've been talking with Julia the last few days, looking back at some articles I can recall the last few years in the Washington Post, specifically about Louisiana. They've done some really great reporting around like the whole criminal justice, but specifically prison conditions, forced labor. I think Mr. Winn is quoted in some of those articles. And I think the last few months, like ICE has added a whole new dimension to this. And I was just reading a piece in The Guardian. I texted to Julia about Great Landry declaring a state of emergency so that they can reopen Camp J, which is like this notorious prison or dungeon, like solitary confinement unit in Angola to house immigrant detainees there, which just seems like complete insanity. And so I wonder maybe if Terrance can speak about what's going on and if there's any sort of reaction or effort lead to challenge this legally in Louisiana and, how this might play out.
Good question. I think I was actually supposed to be in Angola today, with some public officials, but the people that they're holding, ICE has open Camp J, so all those immigrants are all the immigrants are on hunger strike. It's amazing how we allow people to play on the system. Camp J was closed down because it was ruled to be not livable. It closed down while I was there. So they said it's not livable and that they could never reopen it. But play on the system, play on words, certain people can get away with certain things, it's back open. It's a money grab. But this same place that you said people couldn't live in and that it should never be reopened is reopened now. And people are living now. And people are still going through those same conditions. Yes, litigation is being prepared for it because if you recall, reading those articles, when they brought kids up there and they placed them in the area of the prison that no one was living in. But they got the kids out of there because kids kids should be separated from adults. But dealing with the immigrants, it's like now we don't want to see them as humans because the narrative has changed. Because who's the person whose voice is the loudest in our country are speaking against these people. But the workers, they're crying about it because they're saying, who we gonna get to till our land at a cheaper price? We ain't gonna do it because, and so people are feeling that effect. Just how immigration, how ICE is coming through. People are feeling the effects of people being sent back home. But I'm standing on your question. Your question is, yes, there are things being put into place to kind of stop that. But our system has changed drastically up under our current administration because our current administration is a real reflection of our higher administration, our higher office. On the smaller scale slightly, it's the same, we operate upon the same principles, so it's gotta be hard to get it out the way when the system is already for you. When you didn't design the system so that it could, carry everything that you want it to carry. So it's gonna be a hard uphill fight.
Any other questions from the audience? We have probably time for one more.
Are you allowed to name any of these companies that you found in your research that you keep talking about? And the other part of my question is, so let's say the automotive industry, if you ban, if you know, successfully get them to like stop importing using prison labor, and then they're like, okay, well now we have a 30% markup on our imports. Do you think there would be pushback from people because now they have to spend more on like buying cars or like fixing their cars and things like that? And now people are like, well, I would actually, yeah, like have the cheaper labor.
Sure. So on your first question, yes, our report does have companies who we think are likely connected to prison labor based on the research that we did looking at the sorts of companies that are reported to use prison labor, and then which companies in Canada may source from these companies. So we were able to draw some of those links in the report. For your second question, I think a lot of consumers don't know that the products that they're using could be connected to forced labor and prison labor. And I think if that was more widely known and people were made aware of it, perhaps it wouldn't be as big of an issue as we might think it is. And the effect of prison labor, because as Terrance and Ronald was saying, is that, you know, in prisons, they either get paid nothing or very little. And the effect of that is to depress wages altogether, right? So you have depressed wages in Alabama, in Louisiana, right? So that is not something we necessarily want to be contributing to and helping sustain. And that's what we're hoping that our report like brings to light is, you know, how can we as Canadians stop sustaining this system of exploitative labor? Yeah, one more.
Yeah, is there evidence enough at this point to file a police complaint? Maybe the cops could do the drug work.
I mean, so one of the things we did was we looked very closely at Alabama, and that's because there is some great information that was uncovered by some reporters in Alabama tying a bunch of different companies. So our report is not exhaustive. It is not, there's much more information out there. There could be more direct information out there that could be linking companies. So our hope is we're just kind of peeling back the veil on this, and the system of prison labor and its connections to the Canadian economy could be much bigger and larger in scale than we could have uncovered in our report. So there could be more evidence out there, but we're just kind of setting the foundations through our report. Well, yes, one more question.
Sorry, just a question. You mentioned like proper due diligence being done, because I think a lot of companies will just say we've done, or we don't have the infrastructure to effectively assess this. We ask, you know, we rely on our counterparties to basically make attestations to us, because I think that's what a lot of firms do. They say we rely on people doing business with us to do this, and then they kind of close their eyes to it. Is there you know, infrastructure firms, consultants who have the ability to make these types of assessments? Like, you've done some fantastic work going into these prisons, to these institutions, you've had people coming out of these places talk about the horrors that are happening there. But is there a way that this is scalable where, you know, I'm not saying, you know, KPMG, Deloitte, or any of these firms necessarily having the ability to send investigators out to actually look at this? There are people currently doing this work so it is scalable, so that companies can't basically say there isn't people or services available to do this due diligence.
Yeah, there are a number of NGOs that I know that do this work. There are a number of also human rights institutions. I think there's one in Denmark that's doing this. There's, trying to remember what the name of it is, Veritas. There's a number of organizations that can do this sort of supply chain tracing, but at the same time, I think one of the things that Lola was pointing out is that it's not super transparent. And we also need the government to act to create circumstances where it can be more transparent, because we need more transparency in the supply chain for us to be able to, as civil society, call out these companies. So yeah, I think there could be more work done there. Okay, I am going to call Sandra up to close this out. And give some thanks to our panelists. So
Yeah, can we just give a round of applause? Okay, so yeah, thank you so much for coming today. We really appreciate seeing you all, new and familiar faces. And thank you again to our panelists, Ronald and Terrance, and our students who are now clinic students. So please be aware there's lots and lots of opportunities at the IHRP for you if you are students. So before you go, please we have a QR code of the report so you can download it. We have a physical copy you can look at as well. And if you are interested in any sort of IHRP work or the work that we're doing now, please also scan our QR code to keep in touch. And we will send you listservs and events and messages to keep you informed. So thanks again for coming.